The Winter Latina Show.
Hosted by IDM.
And yeah, we are alive and mostly. So as usual, we have some technical issues of last minute, but that's okay. I forgot my Instagram, but everywhere.
I might as well welcome everyone to another fun-filled installment number 15. I cannot believe it. Of the Winter Latina Show, where we discuss such fun subjects as death, destruction, and evil Russian influence, or at least that's what certain Western media outlets would have us believe. And so today we'll talk about what has been widely described as the Russian law, i.e. the foreign agent law in the country of Georgia in the Caucasus, not to be confused with the American state. I'm sure anytime an average consumer of the news logs into CNN, there might be a little bit of a confusion there. So we wanted to clarify that. So this is something that has been in the news for the last little while. We see a constant feed of protests described as Georgia's valiant civil society protesting this law against evil Russian influence. And so we wanted to look into this law, we wanted to look into the protests, and we wanted to look at other similar foreign agent laws and basically talk about whether the qualifications coming from the mainstream media sources are all that they're cracked up to be. And perhaps we'll even touch upon a couple of South American cases, right? Marcelo, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I think I am ready now. Everything's working on my side, but okay, we didn't have any problems with the main channels of streaming.
And of course, as you guys are watching, you're welcome to comment, perhaps ask questions, make suggestions. We'll try to get to some of them, and if not, we can respond to them after the episode airs. So
just for myself, for my Brazilians, especially Brazilian friends that might watch this now or later, remembering that all the links and ways to help the Rio Grande do Sul state of Brazil that has been flooded and still being flooded by the rain. Yeah, it's, public services.
Is this normal to have that long term of not the consequences of natural disasters, but in terms of just that much rain?
It's a tropical country.
Right.
Well,
so it could be
that part specifically, it's deep south of Brazil, so it's not exactly on the tropical line, but still we have a lot of reasons to have a lot of rain on that region, on that particular region.
I see.
And yeah, I mean, there are good reasons for things have happened in the way they have happened. So
okay, so basically better state intervention would be required for something that is climatically normal for this region. I'm assuming is what you're trying to say.
It's a very good word.
Better is a good word. Right. So jumping into the topic of Georgia's protests, again, this is something that has been in the news, and it's really, I'm going to open CNN here, the most trusted, the self-described most trusted name in the news despite the plummeting ratings. And I'll just read you a couple of qualifying adjectives and other parts of speech that they use to describe the law. Of course, the term controversial pops up throughout this entire article. and this is the article about the fact that this law, in fact, did pass in the parliament, but it requires the president of the country to sign it into law. And of course, the president is vowing to veto it. And we'll talk about the very interesting president and her very strong connections to such organizations as NATO in a little while. So right off the bat, you have controversy. And there are, again, very, very typical terminology. They're talking about increasingly, quote unquote, snuffing out opposition in civil society. Very, very token language we see a lot in these cases. They're talking about, quote, widespread domestic opposition to this law. So they're presenting the ruling party, right? It's called Georgia's Dream, right? The Georgian Dream. I think it has a longer name, has the word democracy in it, but that's kind of how it's shortened in the English language. It talks about, so it kind of pits the public against this party, but nonetheless, this party was elected multiple times by that same public. So that's kind of interesting in the way that they're presenting it. And they are, of course, talking about Moscow's geopolitical orbit being, quote, tough to exit, even though most Georgians want to join the European dream. So yeah, you can tell just by looking at the language here that it's not really, factual reporting. It's very, very, very emotionally charged, and it's clearly trying to sway you in a particular direction. So what is the actual law about? Is it as awful as CNN and a whole slew of official Western pundits and politicians would have you believe? Well, that same article on CNN, and you can find this in other places, what the law requires is organizations, so this would also include news media, NGOs, etc., that receive more than 20% of funding coming from abroad to register as foreign agents. Basically, the law wants greater transparency about funds coming from abroad. Now, to me, that sounds completely reasonable. If you're being funded, I don't care if it's Russia or the European Union, if you're getting a large chunk of change from other countries, and I don't care what that country is, it makes sense for me that you should declare where your money is coming from and what you're spending it on.
Especially what you're spending it on.
Especially what you're spending it on. And so I wanted to see what sort of the people who are promoting this, challenging this law on social media are saying, and they're getting the same questions as what I just said. Why is it that declaring who is paying you and what you're spending it on, why is that not completely reasonable? And from what I can see, these people really are just kind of going around in circles. So I have a post, formerly a tweet, in front of me, coming from the director of, what is the full name of the organization? The European Neighborhood Council. Ooh, that sounds so cozy. It's the Neighborhood Council. And it mentions a whole slew of Eastern Europe, Balkans, Turkey, Caucasus, Central Asia, Middle East and North Africa. And so it's like a neighborhood council, but obviously they have their little dirty fingers in much of the world. And so this director is basically, he's stating the same thing, that if you're getting more than 20% of your cha-ching from foreign organizations or people, you should declare them. Again, what's the problem? And he says that because Georgia has a European future, such law, quote, makes no technical sense. I'm not sure what technical sense means, but he claims that it's because when you are in the European Union, and of course Georgia is not, you're going to be getting money from other countries. So NGOs, businesses, for instance, money going to universities. So it all sounds really nice and quaint here. And it talks about that a law like this would really undermine the European integration model. And therefore, the current government of Georgia that has been elected, the ruling party, multiple times, is, quote, accused of sabotaging Georgia's EU membership, end quote. And so this is the Russian part, if you wanted to know why this is being called the Russian law. Quote, the sabotage appears to be happening because the Georgian government and specific business elites are alleged to be receiving contracts and money and pressure from Russia, end quote. And then he talks about quote unquote normal Georgians. I think he might not be speaking English well, because if you say normal these days, people will throw rotten tomatoes at you. You probably should say ordinary Georgians, but quote, are very
I don't
angry
even think
about
that is correct.
No, it's definitely not. It's definitely politically incorrect to say that these days. So yeah, dude, you gotta clean up your language a bit, or some people might. Maybe I'll report you. Just kidding. I don't play your dirty games, as far as we know. And so, yeah, and then he's being asked by People Weiss, declaring, that if you're getting that much money, why is it unreasonable? And he's basically just repeating what he posted in the original post. So he's actually not really addressing the question. And so, but here you can see a good example. So when they say it's the Russian law, from what I've seen, it's two key reasons. It's A, there is evil influence coming from Russia to not allow Georgia into the beautiful European garden. But B, the other reason they call it the Russian law is because Russia has a similar foreign agent law. So if any country adopts a foreign agent law, by definition, it's automatically the Russian law, even though the Russian law has links to the original Foreign Agent Registration Act of 1938 coming from, drum roll, the United States. But we're not calling it the American law, even though a lot of these laws are partially based on the American law, which predates them, and it serves as a good legal model. We're calling it the Russian law. So right off the bat, this is, pardon my French, is a huge shit show, in my opinion.
Yeah. So the first thing that calls my attention is, okay, they call it the Russian law. They need to do their little tiny weeny propaganda, and try to use their strong soft power to dissuade people to go forward with this. But what calls my attention is that they are so worried about Georgia getting this law, but they also say that this type of the main influence in the country comes from Russia. Okay, so Russia opens their
but
NGOs.
Automatically you're gonna have, if you're getting money from Russia, you would have to register much like everyone else. So what's the problem? What's the problem?
Yeah, exactly. Well, if Europe does not want Russian influence in Georgia or any other country, well, I think that this law would be very good.
That
for
would be
them,
pretty good. You'll see exactly that the money is coming from, the evil Kremlin. So what's the problem? Yeah, so right off the bat, you have an issue here, right? And so, of course, when they use this veiled language and they talk about European integration and how much money is coming from the EU, so again, you have this dichotomy between EU money, regardless of what it's used for, is good. Money coming from other countries is bad. So then it's not really about a foreign agent law. It's about, well, our influence is good, but their influence is bad, and that is complete. I mean, that would be more honest if they were to just phrase it in this way, that we're the ones that will want to be in charge here in our little colony here in the Caucasus. We don't want Russians to be, to have any connection to this country anymore. And as a reminder, we did cover Georgia in a previous episode where we talked about Russian-Georgian relations over centuries. So if you guys are interested, you can jump back in. We'll link it to this episode. I never thought we'd be covering Georgia twice in a matter of, a couple of months, because it is a small country. But as you could see, because it is a former Soviet state and a former country, in the former part of the Russian Empire, so it has really strong connections to Russia, even though obviously Georgians are not ethnically Russian. And so you kind of have a similar situation to Ukraine, right? Obviously, Georgia hasn't gone the way of Ukraine, but it could have. And so another interesting parallel between Georgia and Ukraine is, of course, the initial wave of these post-Soviet color revolutions, right? Ukraine had the Orange Revolution in 2004. Georgia had the Rose Revolution in 2003, when the glorious narcissistic Mikhail Saakashvili was installed as its leader. And of course, now we've come full circle because he's currently imprisoned in Georgia, having had his little 10 years in Ukraine. He was back, and we talked about him being back in the US. He was a Brooklyn hipster, and now he is in prison in Georgia. So obviously, whatever promises that were made were not quite all that they were cracked up to be. Although in the beginning, I think some people did like him, because Georgia was having a shitload of money. I'm really swearing a lot today, but it's my show. I can do what I want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think Twitter is going to block you for that.
Definitely not
YouTube,
Twitter.
I'm not sure.
YouTube doesn't like some other random things, so that's why we speak about them obliquely. But yeah, Georgia was having a ton of money pumped into it after this revolution, so certain economic things temporarily improved, but it was because of this funding. It wasn't about Saakashvili's magic touch. And so he actually has a little bit of a connection to today's situation, because he is the one that introduced the current president of Georgia. And I don't want to butcher her name, although I have some Georgian roots. I do not speak Georgian. Her name is Salome Zurabishvili, and she was the foreign minister in his government. Now, even though she is an ethnic Georgian, she had no connection to Georgia, right? She was born in France. She was a lifelong diplomat in France. And if you look at some of the things that she was involved in, she worked for NATO. So that just tells you the type of pedigree that the garden likes to have for it installed, right? Politicians in its colonies outside the garden, with the promise in perpetuity, perhaps, to eventually join the garden, right? So she was brought in by Saakashvili. Saakashvili himself, as we know, is a Columbia University grad, right? He also has a ton of connections in education abroad, and so. During her, literally, this is from our favorite resource, the Wikipedia, quote, during her tenure as foreign minister, so this is, 2000s, the first decade, the new group of Friends of Georgia, wow, these names are awful, was created, bringing together Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, and Poland to help Georgia's aspirations towards NATO and foster European integration, end quote. So, is it really a surprise that a lady who is a French diplomat who worked for NATO is trying to bring Georgia into NATO? I mean, it's exactly what you would expect a bureaucrat of that nature to be doing. And of course, for most of her life, she's had French citizenship. I think when she became president, not when she was a foreign minister, she had to renounce her French citizenship, as far as I understand, when she's at that level of power. But as a foreign minister, I think she still had her dual citizenship and obviously dual interest in that regard. So you can kind of see how the seeds for the type of protests that we're seeing today have been planted, many, many decades ago, essentially since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And it's really interesting that in that period, with fostering all these, they call, like in that CNN article, they call it the civil society. Basically, they're paying money for people to present a particular point of view. This would be a very sort of generically pro-Western point of view with no deviation from it. And perhaps some of those people are true believers. Who knows what's actually going on in their minds. They're certainly being well compensated, and to be anti-Russian, right? So not sort of embracing the geographic position of Georgia being sort of in between the two places, but staunchly choosing one over the other and disregarding any kind of historical connections that Georgia and Russia may have had. And so, it's really interesting that the party, right, that's being heavily criticized in all these Western media articles, the Georgian Dream, hasn't been a pro-Russian party. It has been more of a pragmatic party in terms of we kind of want to have relations with both. And again, this is the party that has been reelected multiple times. And so the fact that this party is much more reasonable is the reason why it's being criticized. Ooh, their connections to, their business connections to Russia. God forbid Georgia and Russia do business together. Russia used to be the biggest market for the export of Georgian wine, for instance, and a whole bunch of other things. And of course, Russia has a huge Georgian diaspora living there as well. So it's completely natural for the two countries to have a connection. Georgia being a tourist country as well, and getting at least previously getting a large amount of its GDP from tourism. Who traveled there? Russians traveled there. These days, it's more like Russians who oppose the evil Russian government, again, big air quotes, that would go there. So they're really losing out on a lot of money that they could be getting. And so just having this ruling party trying to improve relations to a very reasonable, pragmatic extent has really freaked out the official West, which is why this foreign agent law is sort of the culmination of the protests. And of course, as soon as you start diving, or rather going down the rabbit hole of the protests, you'll see like, oh, isn't that interesting? These protesters have connections to the National Endowment for Democracy, right? An American think tank known for fostering all kinds of fun things in the former Soviet space, et cetera, et cetera. So by no means these people are just completely ideological. There is a financial interest in there as well. But I think it's important, we mentioned this at the top of the episode, to go back to the American 1938 Foreign Agent Registration Act. Because like we said, this Georgian foreign agent law is not so much about Russia. All of these laws in some shape or form, there are obviously some differences in terms of what they need to declare, how much they need to declare, what the transparency is like, goes back to this American precedent because it's the earliest one. And it's, obviously there are other things that other countries have used. For instance, they've used parts of the U.S. Constitution as the basis for their own constitution. Whether that's right or wrong, that's a separate question. But basically, the official reason for introducing the FARA in 1938 was to counter Nazi propaganda. Now, you can draw your own conclusions whether that was the reason why it was introduced. And if you go and read sort of the official documents, including unofficial, but pretty much along the party line, statements on Wikipedia and other similar sources, you'll see that, well, this act is really just about transparency. It's okay to have foreign powers, meddling and lobbying in our country. We just want transparency. And really, the FARA hasn't really been implemented in the US, unlike other countries that have foreign agent laws. But then you scroll down and you look at, where has this been used? And you see a whole list of media. I wonder where those media sources are from. Oh, look, China and Russia. All those media sources had to register as foreign agents. That's really interesting. And of course, this predates the fact that RT was completely booted out, right? This is one step further. But it's very interesting because then you can jump on the description of the Russian foreign agent law from 2012, which is also partially based on the American one, not fully. And you'll see very different language, right? Again, it's about crushing civil society, blah, 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 blah. But it's the same thing. It literally is these media sources having to register as foreign agents. So somehow Chinese and Russian media in the US having to register as foreign agents is fine. It really hasn't been used much. But in Russia, when foreign sources have to register as foreign agents, that's bad. That's about stifling civil society, et cetera, et cetera. So you literally have very similar actions being taken, and they're described in completely different ways in these sources. So you can have them, side by side and be like, well, this is very interesting. It's the exact same damn thing. So yeah. And so
yesterday we had Neboja here when we had this live stream about Robert Fico attempt assassination. We still don't know how things are going, so we still call it attempt. And Neboja actually mentioned that he had covered a lot about this with President Trump. That's one of the laws that they are pushing over Trump to smear his campaign and try to convict him of anything. And he also mentioned the fact that out of nowhere, from night to day, all the reporters from outside, especially RT and all these media outlets from China, Russia, and everywhere else that's probably not the United States and Europe, and I don't even know if Europe has entered on that. And he said from night to day, they just had to register to all this kind of stuff, and it was really very interesting how he describes how they got completely handicapped and handcuffed about what they could do in the country as human beings, as people, as persons.
Which again, when you read the actual description, it sounds like it's a very benign thing. So then why is it when you read the description of similar laws in other countries, it sounds like this really sinister thing, when in reality the parallels are very much similar? And so the other thing that I want to mention is that you may have seen that we call this the anti-Soros law. And I know some people really jump on this bandwagon and other people really scoff at it, saying like, well, Soros is not behind all this stuff. And this is why we, the Russians, I'm collectively speaking right now without any mandate to do so, we have the term collective Soros, right? It's more about a symbol. Yeah, we use the collective Soros. This is a term. And then we have some other funny terms like the children of Soros, but it sounds really funny in Russian. Sarasyata. We call them Sarasyata, like little Soros children. So, but basically, it's not about this particular man, right? It's about a symbol of, perhaps it doesn't even have to be one person, right? It can be as they call it in Russia, they're oligarchs. In the West, they're billionaire philanthropists. So it doesn't even have to be a billionaire philanthropist, right? It could be an organization, but right, it's someone who is not just happily handing over money because he's filthy rich and he doesn't even know what to do with it, right? There is a particular political ideological purpose for funding particular types of organizations. And of course, it's all presented under a very nice term like, we're creating civil society, we want people to have pluralism of opinions and political views, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, when you actually look at what those types of organizations, including the Open Society that is a Soros organization, what they engaged in the former Soviet space in the 1990s, it really is quite significantly more sinister, right? It was about rewriting history. It was about undermining any kind of indigenous traditions and roots in multiple countries. And it was about creating this really fertile soil for introducing much, much more foreign influence and having governments that are really anti-people in those countries and are really more about the looting and the stealing, the types of stuff that happened in Russia in the 1990s. So this is the reason why we use this kind of terminology. So I know some people get really like, this is so stupid. This is beyond tinfoil hat stuff to be using this term. But of course, again, to me, this term is a symbol. We're not, you can differentiate between the actual actions of, the Open Society and anything else that Soros may have NGOs do. And I don't know. I don't want to say that all NGOs have these sinister motives. I mean, perhaps there are some NGOs, I don't know, maybe they're saving kittens and puppies that are stray, perhaps, without disseminating propaganda. It kind of remains to be seen. But I would just say generally, these NGOs that have very nice names about democracy and press freedom, et cetera, they have some other agenda. And that agenda is quite often damaging to the people of the country where this NGO operates.
Yeah,
and so go ahead.
In Brazil, this is a very big problem in Brazil, because yes, we have a lot of these NGOs that are just taking care of puppies, abandoned dogs. Dogs in Brazil is kind of it's bad to say that, but they run like a pest, because there is no control.
Yeah.
There is no control over the street dogs. So there are a lot of these NGOs that take care of dogs, that have special veterinaries that are very, very cheap, or even free sometimes. And yeah, they of course they receive money from somewhere. Not sure where, but then you have some. For example, there is one that is called I'm for Peace in Portuguese. Sou da Paz. I am for peace.
Very nice name. How can you argue with being for peace?
Which was a very, very important NGO. It was built by a man whose daughter was assassinated in Rio de Janeiro. So it started legit. And then you go to nad.org today and you go to the funding, and then you see that there's a lot of money pumping into these NGOs. So and then you start to back check these NGOs. Perhaps I'm a bit too close to the microphone now. I'm hearing me back. And then you go to back check these NGOs, and then you see a lot of them pump money into journalistic investigation. And every time you see the type of press release that they create or journalistic investigation that they create, it's always something related to the government, to the federal government in Brazil, in the case, and there's always some scandal, corruption scandal, and it's okay. There is, we know, and it would be nice that we could know more of the corruption scandals. We would have less of the situation that we have in Rio Grande do Sul now. But at the same time, a lot of it, you see that is just perception shaping. And another topic that we discussed yesterday, that
perception is more important than reality. Yeah, which is
reality
really
doesn't matter.
Very postmodern concept where it's all about this astroturfing protests. Some protests might be real, or initially they might start off as a real, protest with grievances, and then they be completely astroturfed and presented as something else on social media. So yes, this was definitely. If you guys want to jump back and listen to Nebojša talk about that concept, it's definitely worthwhile, and we can revisit it again. I think it's something that has happened since the collapse of the other ideologies of modernity, right? Liberalism being the only ideology that remained, turning into post-liberalism, and now it's all about perception management rather than reality. And of course, when everything is online, right, sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between what's real and what isn't. And we're not even talking about AI or any kind of deep fakes and stuff like that, right? It's just, it could be about changing the angle of what you're shooting in real time and presenting it as something else, calling this foreign agent law the Russian law, right? The examples can be endless. It's about perception management. But going back to Brazil.
Yeah, exactly. So going back to Brazil, we have right now we are starting to hear a little bit that there are some, scraps about a new foreign agent law in Brazil, which is, we can start to get ready to seeing these scenes of Georgia in São Paulo, Brasilia, Rio de Janeiro. So for the Brazilian friends that are watching us, pay attention to this. And we can go just a couple of months back, and we'll have the situation between Elon Musk and the Supreme Court of Brazil on Twitter files or whatever they call it. And so I think, I'm not sure if I mentioned this on this show. I'm sure I mentioned this on my channel. I found at some point some Twitter spaces that had invited those profiles that were asked to be banned from Brazil. And all of those profiles were, supporting of a former president. Everybody has the right to support anyone they want for president. The problem is that the former president, just a couple of weeks ago, had a good manifestation in the center of São Paulo, which is the biggest city of Brazil, with almost to a bit more than 700,000 people on it, where he arrived. How's it called? Embraced by the Israeli flag, and just after it, he just press countenance. Is it countenance? The name of a
salute.
A salute to the American flag, to North America, to United States flag. So I'm sorry, but this guy I have to play this video here of Neboja from yesterday. It's a very quick video, quick intervention, but it's extremely important. Just let me see if I can get this right now. Just a Yeah, no sound. I know it was not possible to do this, but it's all right. Basically, what he says is, all right. I had a lot of sounds going on in my head at the same time,
No worries. It was an
and
attempt.
now you're muted.
Oh,
No, oh no. Now I have no sound in
now
my
you
head.
have no sound.
Now I
Can
have
you hear?
sound back in my head. Yeah,
Okay.
technical issues. All right. So basically, what he says is, all these people that go around, Georgian people, coming back to Georgia, all these Georgian people going around and asking for sanctions over Georgia.
I was literally looking at a tweet yesterday. It just seems to be this repeated pattern with, and in some countries, let's say the ones who are from Russia or Belarus, right, they left and they're now abroad, but they're demanding the same thing, sanction our countries. So, but some of these Georgians are in Georgia because the Georgian situation is a bit more complex in that sense, right? And so they're basically demanding sanctions on their government and inviting more foreign influence in their country, which just blows your mind that everyone knows that when sanctions do work, they harm regular people. They're not necessarily harming the politicians that you want to sanction. If you look at North Korea or Cuba or Venezuela, like countries like that, in the Russian case, sanctions largely failed. Although Russia had to do a lot of changes to and a lot of preparation to essentially either bypass them or not have them harm it, which is, we talked about the fact that this is one of the reasons why it didn't intervene in the Ukrainian situation in 2014. But in other cases, sanctions are in Iran, right, highly damaging with let's say access to medicine or something like that, right? There are people who have no access to particular kind of medicines because their countries are sanctioned. And so these people know this, and they are still inviting sanctions on their own people. And that just blows my mind because this is
basically what he says is that, well, that's the basic definition of treason.
Of course. And I don't know if it's like Neboja said, again, we'll link to this video since we were unable to play it, but I don't know if this is about them being in power at any cost, like he said, or if there is this very strong ideological conviction at by any means necessary, we're going to achieve what we want. I mean, it might be a whole bunch of things going on at once. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but it always blows my mind. You have the so-called Belarusian opposition leader posting the same kind of BS. You have all these, hysterical pro-Western Russian liberals who went to live in the Baltic, for instance, or in Israel, posting the same kind of BS of sanction our countries. And then you have these Georgians, sanction our countries. And I could, I would understand if they were opposing the government. Again, I would disagree with it perhaps, or perhaps not, depending on where this is taking place. But I would understand that. But I do not understand the calls to sanction their countries and have more foreign influence, right? It just blows my mind. But these people are very transparent about it. And so, I mean, there has to be some kind of an ideological conviction behind it. I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, possibly sociopathy as well.
Yeah, of course.
Something going on there too.
So just going back quickly to Brazil, and then we had this issue with between the Supreme Court of Brazil. They tried to impersonating one judge, but it's a decision of the Supreme Court. Everybody else either agree or just abstained. And Elon Musk itself, where he, threatened to bring all the documents to the Supreme Court of the United States. Well, I'm sorry, dude, but the Supreme Court of the United States rules over the United States. The Supreme Court of Brazil rules over Brazil. And if you want to have your software, and look, I want X to be on Brazil, but I also want the Brazilians to be protected from foreign influence. And all these profiles that I was talking about, they were all connected to, strongly propagandize the former president, which we already understood where he comes from. And at the same time, all those people were living abroad. Like myself, I understand if the Supreme Court say, yo, dude, what you say is not good for Brazil. I would have questions, but these people, they were pretty legit on what they were doing. You could understand what they were doing, Sure. And so, okay, in Brazil, we don't have a foreign agent act or a foreign agent law or anything of the kind. But the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court. They were trying. Is it good? Is it not good? Well, that's for the Brazilians to decide.
Yeah, well, I think this is interesting because the social media question is related, right? It's not, may not always be directly related, because usually the argument about, let's say China or Russia saying, they banned certain social media networks. It's not so much about them banning it. It's about these networks not complying with local laws. And so, for instance, the case of Facebook, the reason why there was a huge issue with Facebook is because it all of a sudden started allowing the type of content that was initially banned, which is basically Azov Nazi propaganda, extreme stuff, extreme calls to violence, the kinds of things that they would ban in any other case and completely permanently remove these accounts were all of a sudden allowed. And there's a lot of, if you go back to, the initial stages of February, March 2022, April perhaps, you'll see a lot of media coverage of that. And you'll see some alternative media sources also talking about what actually happened. And it's a very good example of, well, here are these social huge giants, right, coming from another country, and they're not complying with, well, not only are they not complying with local laws, they're not complying with their own policies. They make this exception because, it's a war. Therefore, we can allow glorification of violence against Russians. And so, like, what do you expect?
And not allowing Russians to say anything good about Russians.
Well, of course, that's the other thing. But, when you have obviously glorification of violence and, Nazi propaganda is banned in general on Facebook, right? I mean, you might see stuff, popping up here and there, but usually they take it down pretty quickly. Facebook is pretty authoritarian in that regard. And so why was it that all of a sudden in that particular time frame, you just allowed everything if it has something to do with Ukraine and just extreme calls to violence? And so, they were breaking their own rules. They were not just, allowing something that was breaking the Russian law. And so what is the expectation there? Do you expect that nothing will be done in Russia? Governments in different countries are going to ask you to compel you or not compel you to do something. And so, I know it's a very difficult question because obviously with, Musk's control of X, and the European Union, the European Union is freaking out how much free speech is allowed these days compared to the previous, version of Twitter. And they are wanting to, enact certain laws and ban certain content. And of course, you already have a ban, remember, with this is not allowed to be shown in Germany. RT is not allowed to be shown in any parts of the European Union unless you use a VPN. So there's all this other stuff too. I don't know how much it's changed with Elon Musk, but definitely this was the case a couple of years ago. But basically, yeah, it's just, obviously this is a very complicated related question. But yeah, it's pretty interesting how the perception of foreign agent type measures depends on what the country is. So again, very easy test. Is this country within the rules-based order? Then the rules-based order, right? Then it's probably a good thing. As soon as this country is and somehow outside of it, even tangentially, because again, Georgia has really been largely controlled by, the official West for a while now, then any attempts to regain any semblance of sovereignty is going to be presented as this awful thing and, like we said, described as the evil Russian law. So yeah, it's a pretty easy test, and you can sort of judge the situation accordingly.
Yeah. So I have one tweet that I have. Let me put on the screen. Yeah, and I have to put it on the screen the other way around as well. Okay. I have this one tweet from a Libanese that I think it kind of wrap it up very well how the situation is that and basically it says, when you're revolting against foreign influence while waving foreign flags. And there's this picture of the manifestations on Georgia with, you see everything but a Georgian flag. And right. I saw
on my
also,
screen it looks small, but I see some US flags, EU flags, which actually kind of looks like the Ukrainian Maidan. I think it's just it's a scene that repeats over and over again. And it's almost like, why are you guys so transparent? Can you not at least pretend to be patriotic in any shape or form? Yeah, was that a Ukrainian flag? Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was that.
Well, yeah, you have Ukrainian flags. We have this post from.
Well, beyond
Michael
that,
Roth.
I mean, you have officials from Germany and from multiple Baltic countries joining these protests, which it's obviously not the first time it's happened. We've seen it time and time again in failed or successful counter-revolutionary scenarios. We saw, multiple officials in the Ukrainian Maidan. We remember John McCain being there, a bunch of European officials. Obviously, the Cookie Monster was there too. So you have all of these officials very, very much publicly participating in what's supposed to be a grassroots protest. But of course, you would simply not even dream about the opposite, right? The alternative, having officials from another country participating, let's say in the trucker, let's say Russian officials and Georgian officials from the Georgian Dream Party participating, I don't know, in the trucker or the yellow vest protests, right? Immediately, these people will be thrown into prison for I don't know how many decades, right? And so I know people always say, well, this is not even worth mentioning because of course they are in power. Of course they expect, that they can do whatever they want. But I still think it's worth mentioning because it's a very, very easy illustration that the opposite would simply not be allowed. And here you have these people publicly, again, it's like they can't control themselves. It's one thing when you're on social media and you're making certain comments about it and you're, criticizing the Georgia's ruling party and this foreign agent law and whatever, you're using gaslighting language. But it's very different when you physically come out and you join this protest. Like, how is this not meddling? This is precisely what this law is supposed to counter. And you're freaking out that you're not going to be able to do this. But at the same time, you're dumb enough to go because you can't control yourself. Like, whom is this meant for? Like, this is totally meant for the audience abroad that is going to be looking at these things. But the fact that these things have happened so many times, these types of protests, these types of, foreign officials participating in a protest in a foreign country against the government, I mean, at some point, I think the public is getting more and more savvy, I hope, or at least some elements of the public, especially with the splintering of the media into a lot of alternative media sources, right? Like us, a budding alternative media source. Also, just the decline of standard, traditional media. I feel like people, just even more ordinary people, are a little bit more savvy about these things, even if they're not completely, tuned in and have their finger on the pulse of every single current event that's, happening around the world. So yeah, but I mean, I guess at the same time, the template worked before, so they're just too lazy to use a different template, and they just keep plugging in the data and then just basically vomiting it out, and it's the
But
same thing over and over again. Yeah.
But that's exactly what calls my attention nowadays because it just seems that they are, reusing the template for everything.
Hmm.
Smearing. You get everything that you heard on whatever Libya war. You hear about Ukraine.
Hmm.
Russia in Ukraine. Everything you had in Iraq, you hear in Ukraine
You
or
just said
Gaza.
Iraq with like this George Bush accent. It was amazing. It's like
Iraq.
you've been. I know Iraq. Come on,
Yeah,
dude. Let's say Iraq.
Iraq,
Yeah,
Iraq.
Iraq, Iran, and
Iraq.
Iraq. That's amazing.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's definitely, yeah, you have, I don't even want to go into the kind of disgusting things that they would mention, but it's the same type of news stories that then end up being debunked weeks or months from that point. Of course, when bullshit is being debunked, fewer people are paying attention to the debunking. They're paying attention to the initial, extremely exaggerated, insane headline. But yeah, it's the same type of stories that we've seen before that have been recycled, which of course is, very, very telling. But I don't know. It still blows my mind that these officials from other countries would just come out and march with so-called ordinary Georgians.
Yeah.
And the
I had I
extent to
had
which, go ahead.
I had one last tweet that
Mhm.
that I think it's important, which is let me put on the screen, which is Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House spokesperson, saying basically the White House says it's deeply concerned about Georgia's law on Kremlin-style foreign agent, and we hope that the president will veto it,
Mhm.
but forgets to say that the U.S. has the similar law, the FARA law, but
Well,
much more
it's the
rigorous.
original law. All the other
Exactly.
laws have been based on, again, not fully, because every country has a particular set of circumstances. But if you look into this question, and this morning, to educate myself further, I looked into a comparison of Russia, Israel, Hungary, Australia, and the U.S. And basically, they were these experts. You could look it up yourself. I'm sure there are other comparisons of other
Hmm.
countries, of specifically of foreign agent laws. And so the conclusion is that the purpose of such laws is to prevent, quote, hidden illegal foreign interference in the internal affairs of the state, to ensure transparency of such influence, blah, 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 right? So even though they may be certain differences between these laws, there are multiple countries that have them, and there's a reason why they have them. And so, yeah, it's just really interesting. It's all about, as Nebojsa would say, who versus whom, which of course
Yeah.
comes from the original, perhaps like Lenin quotes. It depends on who is doing it and to whom, right? So if it's coming from the garden, then it's okay. If it's coming from a country that may be even slightly outside the garden or fully outside the garden, then it's obviously evil and bad, and it cannot be implemented. Although we can go back and look at the track record of what happens when there are no such laws, and
Mhm.
the type of influence that exists in, let's say, the former Soviet space. And of course, we can also look at the way the sort of the other side of the coin, where people like you and I, who are not being funded in any shape or form by foreign governments, but we have opinions on certain political issues that are outside of the mainstream. And then, of course, there's always these comments that, ooh, you're getting your money from the Kremlin, et cetera, which is, is just really kind of fascinating that these would be the people that would be promoting the existence of NGOs in Russia, but you're at the same time not allowed to, have opinions that are outside of the mainstream. So yeah, it's all very much about who is doing it and to whom. So, which is really
Exactly.
kind of sad.
Just before we come in on air, I was mentioning the case of Nicaragua, for example, that has a foreign agent law and has used the foreign agent law to remove the subversive people from the political sphere of the country. And now, well, although the president of Nicaragua has been, democratically, at least on the Western shape of democracy, it has been democratically elected. They call it the dictatorship, because this is a very nice word to repeat
Or
over
regime,
and over again.
regime or dictatorship.
Regime, dictatorship, autocratic, whatever, this guy just can try to use
This is why I advocate for using the exact same terminology. You can talk about the EU regime if you want. Well, I don't know. You might not be able to because you're in the EU. You might get a hello, Marcelo. You can't use that kind of language. But yeah, this is why I advocate using
unless
exactly
I
the
want
same
to
kind
use it against Orban.
That's true. You can talk about the Hungarian regime. Yeah, but basically, this is why I recommend using their own words against themselves and them, right? Because why not?
Why
It's
not?
very,
Exactly.
it's very relative when that type of terminology is implemented. And there are certainly regimes that the rules-based order supports or supported, or at least, let's say, non-democratic, autocratic countries like Saudi Arabia, up until recently, that was completely not a problem and didn't really have much negative publicity until Saudi Arabia started making a turn towards more of a, in the Chinese direction, for example, right? And then we started having more of that terminology, although the political scene in Saudi Arabia didn't really change dramatically internally, right? In terms of its being definitely not a Western democracy by Western democratic, basically, definition, right? According to that definition. So
that's
regimes are fine as long as they're useful to the rules-based order in some way as well.
Exactly. You just touch a point that's very interesting. From my youth until recently, or maybe until today, we used to believe that the Shiite were the extremists, and the Sunni were from the Muslim. I don't know how it works exactly, but they have the Shia and the Sunnis.
Yeah, well, it's the original early split within Islam. Yeah,
exactly. And now the Sunnis are starting to become the extremists out of nowhere. I don't know if they're demoting the Shiite to normalizing, but they are bringing up the Sunnis.
Well, I think it's a little bit more complicated because obviously if you look at Iran and then if you look at some of the political Islam, obviously it's going to be different denominations that are being used. But yeah, I think just in general, the coverage is shifted in terms of what is and isn't a regime has changed based on the relationship with the rules-based order as opposed to the actual changes within those countries in whatever direction. So yeah, this is why I say, might as well use the word regime about our favorite gynecologist, Ursula. She's in charge of the European regime, for example.
Isn't it the definition of autocracy,
When she's unelected? Yeah,
it's one of the
definitions. It's one of the definitions. Yeah, it's definitely one of the definitions. But yeah, it's really interesting. So basically, I think to sort of bring this back to Georgia and to start wrapping it up, the law has passed, right, in the Georgian parliament. Again, as a reminder, this is a parliament that has been democratically elected. The rules-based order wanted a democracy in Georgia. This is what they've elected. This is whom they've elected. The ruling party has been in charge for a while. It has been repeatedly reelected. So that also should tell you something about protest. And perhaps it is the loudest people who are on the streets and not necessarily the majority. I'm not sure if I believe the polling of, this is how many people actually want to not have this law, and this is how many people actually want to only exclusively have a relationship with the European Union over Russia. Who knows? I haven't looked into this question, but I would say I have. To me, it's a little bit suspicious as well. But beyond that, so we now have the Georgian president, the former NATO staff member and a former French diplomat, French-born, right? She has now it's because it passed a couple of days ago. She has about a week to sign it, and of course, she said she's going to veto this, and so we'll see what happens. But I think the parliament. Let me jump back into this article. I think the parliament can still override her veto if it has a majority. So basically, I mean, I don't want to speak too soon, but it seems like the law may have passed. And this is why we're hearing threats of sanctions, threats that Georgia will never be in the EU. Who knows if the EU will still be around for how long? So this is this is a developing situation, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because some analysts have certainly talked about this as another color revolutionary attempt on Georgia, even though the ruling party is not like a pro-Russian party. Although some, idiots like to paint it in this way. Wow, I'm really just letting my mouth run. the way I speak in private, I'm speaking in public. But this is just a more pragmatic party that what's best for Georgia, and that would include having economic relations with other countries, including evil Russia. So, so basically, this, like I said, some people describe it as a color revolutionary attempt. So I think we'll see what happens. So I don't think it's a situation that's been resolved, even though politically it seems like it's pretty much done. Like this law has almost passed. So we'll see. Or has almost been signed into law, I guess we should say.
Yeah, usually any state of law has mechanisms so the president of a country cannot simply veto whatever he wants. It usually goes to a parliament, or in the case of Brazil, Senate, and then it's revoted, and sometimes it's changed if it's needed. Okay, it's agreed between the parties, and then it goes back. And at some point in Brazil, for example, the president can veto it, I believe, twice, and then in the third time he just lost the case. He just can't. If it's approved 3 times, he lost it.
Right. Well, again, to me, like the president of Georgia is a very, very good example of the kind of leaders, right, the puppet leaders that they want for the whole country. Someone who has lived and was born in Europe and lived there much of their life, has been in multiple bureaucratic positions, serving France and serving the NATO bloc, right? Just this absolute perfect example of a ruler of a puppet state. And I'm not sure if Georgian people, at least based on whom they've been electing, I'm not sure if they want to be a puppet state of the official West anymore. I think they want to have much more of a say in their future. And it may not just be the European future.
Which is another characteristics, for example, of the United States, right? If you're born outside the United States, you cannot be a president. Or
yes, and it's very interesting. Like I said, she, again, based on Wikipedia may have been wrong. It said 2018 is when she lost her French citizenship because she became president. So while she was a foreign minister, she still had dual citizenship, what kind of blows my mind. If I were to go back to Russia, and I never want to be in politics, by the way, even in Russia, but if I were to become the Empress of Eurasia, but if I were to go back to Russia and be in politics in any shape or form, I would have to renounce my Canadian citizenship, right? I would not be, and to me that makes perfect sense. You cannot be representing multiple countries when you are in especially high levels of power. So it just blows my mind that as a foreign minister, she was, a dual citizen of, France or the European Union. But it's very, very typical. If you look at the initial leaders, the ministerial cabinet after the Maidan in Ukraine, it was these people that were plucked from different, from the US. They were brought into Ukraine. Some of them have never been to Ukraine, even though they may have been ethnically Ukrainian. So it's kind of a similar situation. Again, I'm looking at this as this big imperial informal empire, and you're basically moving people from colony to colony, and you're putting them in charge as these imperial managers, I guess would be the term. I can think of more offensive terms to use here. And yeah, you're basically moving them and you're assigning them to this new location for, to maybe manage this transition after the, let's say a regime change or a color revolution, and then you might move them back. So to me, this looks like that kind of a situation. So perhaps, the next Georgian leader, an actual president, is going to be a little bit more focused on Georgia, maybe a little bit fewer ties to NATO and to the French bureaucracy. We could hope so, but who knows at this stage. But I mean, considering all the changes that are going on in the world in terms of turning towards multipolarity, I think it might be an inevitability for people to go back, especially countries that are sort of like in between and at a crossroads, and not have to choose one or the other, and actually be able to foster relationships with multiple countries, which would make much, much more sense within the Russian-Chinese model that, Putin and China's leader have been promoting today in Beijing. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, I just hope that Georgia can get his shit together, as we would love to say, if YouTube does not take us down just because of that. And well, I have to say that I love how's it called? Churchella?
You're pouring salt on my wounds. I don't think I can get churchella here, and I tried to find it online. Maybe I can. It's like my favorite. It's my favorite snack, which I haven't had in a long time. Because in Russia, you can just go to any open air market and there are Georgians selling it. And sometimes they make it in other parts of the Caucasus. But yeah, it's like nuts I guess it's in like a wine or in like the grape juice, right? That is solid. It's absolutely delicious. So, to me, Georgian cuisine is the best in the world, even though I'm betraying the motherland right now.
It looks very good. I haven't been to a Georgian restaurant yet, except Churchella, because I have Georgian friends that used to bring me Churchella from Georgia, and it's very good. But I see, those type of like pizza, closed pizza,
Khachapuri, it's delicious.
Exactly.
But see, you need, if you're making it, well, in Italy, you probably have access to all kinds of cheese, but in North America, you may or may not have access to actual Georgian cheese that is necessary, and you'll find replacements. So it tastes good if you're making it yourself, but not quite the same. So there's this, this issue, but you do have access to Georgian wine in all parts of the world. So this is, like I said, Russia being the biggest export market, or having been in the past, for Georgian wine. Perhaps it'll be one day again. Definitely, in my opinion, the best wine in the world.
Really?
So Georgia has a lot of things going for it. Obviously, amazing climate. It is, it is a great tourist spot, but unfortunately, I think the fact that it's such a small country, obviously a country with a very long history, education, et cetera, Stalin, lots of Soviet leaders. But yeah, it's just kind of amazing that even such a small country would generate such hysteria over trying to exert a certain level of sovereignty. It's just very, very telling, right? It's not like Ukraine is a very large country, but here you have a small country, and nonetheless, it's generating this level of, freak out coming from the official West, which is it's remarkable.
Exactly. So I think we have said mostly everything.
This is a shorter episode. We have not been blabbing on for 2 hours.
1 hour 7 minutes. That's good. That's good. We should stay within 1 hour, because Instagram take down the live stream after 1 hour. But that's all right. The people from Instagram comes and sees on YouTube or Twitter or Telegram or Odyssey or VooContact. I'm now streaming to VooContact as well.
How are you?
VooContact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did we get any questions today, or we didn't get any questions that we haven't addressed?
We mostly addressed everything we have seen here. I think the most interesting question was that one in the beginning, that was why didn't Georgia kick those
Children of Soros sounds like a horror movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's kinda.
Well, it kind of is, yes. It kind of is. Politically, it ends up being. No, but in Russian, it sounds funny. It sounds like sarasyata sounds like little piglets. Like in Russian, we say piglet is parasyata, and sarasyata sounds like they're children of Soros, but it sounds like they're little piglets running around. So it sounds
Okay.
cute. So it doesn't quite
Sounds
sound like a
cute.
horror movie. It sounds cute. Yeah, it doesn't sound.
Okay.
Yeah, children of the corn, children of Soros.
You see, you just translated to English. It sounds like a horror movie.
It sounds like a horror movie. Yeah, in English, everything sounds like a horror movie. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, I see. I should have looked at this earlier, but people are saying that didn't the post-Maidan Kiev regime had foreigner appointed as minister? Yes, there were multiple ministers. I believe one of them was the minister of economics, and she came from the U.S. I think she had Ukrainian roots, but I don't think she'd had actually ever been to Ukraine prior to the 2014 government change, let's call it that, as far as I remember. But yeah, I remember it was really big news. It was like people coming from, there was like one from Georgia, of course, one from the US with Ukrainian roots, and a whole bunch of other people coming from other countries. So yeah, it's like this imperial management, like we said. Yeah, so we should probably end this on the children of Soros note.
Children of Soros.
Children of Soros,
Remember.
yeah. Remember.
Next week on your closer theater.
Yeah, well, I hope you could sleep at night after we've mentioned this. Children of Soros.
Jesus. I'm not sure you can sleep anytime.
Not after that. Well, thank you guys for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, if you're from a country where a foreign agent law exists, it would be very interesting for you to share your opinion. Obviously, it's a complicated topic, but I think sometimes the complication depends on where that country is, going back to the who versus whom. So we'll say goodbye and thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Exactly, and just remember to like, share, subscribe, all those things, and all the links are in the description, so you can help Nina by buy me a coffee to her. There's the link to her Buy Me a Coffee. You can help Imprensa de Destruição em Massa, the press of mass destruction, by just giving a super chat or a super like, whatever it's called, the heart with the thing on it. And see you back next week. Bye bye, Nina.
Next week. Thank
See you. Ciao, ciao.